The train wheezed to a stop like an old man catching his breath after climbing too many stairs. Steam hissed from the engine, mixing with the falling snow until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The sign on the platform read, "Copper Hollow," in letters half covered with ice. And beyond it, the world seemed to drop off into nothing but white. Miriam Rose Devereaux stood in the doorway of the passenger car, her gloved hand gripping the cold metal rail. 6 days. 6 days of rattling tracks and sleepless nights from Kansas City. Watching the landscape change from familiar streets to endless prairie to these snow-covered mountains that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky. At 5 feet 11 inches, she had to duck slightly as she stepped onto the platform, her traveling dress practical gray wool that had seen better days brushing against the accumulated snow. The porter handed down her valise, a worn leather thing that had belonged to her father before consumption took him. It held everything she owned, 3 dresses, a handful of books, her mother's ivory comb, and the letter that had brought her here. The letter from Reverend Josiah Mills, written in careful script on paper that smelled of pipe tobacco and promise. End of the line. Miss, the porter said, not unkindly. He was a colored man with kind eyes who'd helped her with her luggage at every stop. You sure someone's meeting you? It's powerful cold to be standing around. Miriam tucked a strand of dark hair back under her bonnet. The Reverend said someone would be here. Her voice carried the educated cadence of a woman who'd spent years teaching other people's children in cramped schoolrooms, making do with whatever books could be scraped together. The porter glanced around the empty platform, doubt written plain on his face. Well, miss, I hope they come soon. Train don't leave for another hour if you change your mind. But Miriam had already made up her mind 3 months ago when the letter arrived. Asterisk Copper Hollow needs a teacher asterisk. It had said asterisk. The children here deserve better than ignorance. Room and board provided. Small salary. Large purpose. After Edward Thornton had withdrawn his marriage proposal citing, with barely concealed relief, that she was rather taller than a man prefers his wife to be, there had been nothing left for her in Kansas City except pitying looks and whispered gossip. The train pulled away, leaving her alone on the platform. Snow fell harder now, thick flakes that stuck to her eyelashes and made her blink. The station house was dark, a padlock on the door. No warmth there, no shelter. She picked up her valise and walked to the end of the platform, her boots making lonely sounds on the frozen boards. The town, what she could see of it through the snow, consisted of a main street that disappeared into white. Buildings hunched against the weather like old men around a dying fire. A church steeple poked up somewhere to the left, but no bells rang. No smoke rose from what might have been the parsonage beside it. The cold bit through her wool coat, found every gap in her clothing. Her fingers, even in gloves, began to numb around the handle of her valise. She'd been cold before Kansas City winters weren't gentle, but this was different. This cold had teeth. It worried at her bones, whispered that she'd been foolish to come, foolish to believe a letter from a stranger, foolish to think she could make a new life in a place that couldn't even bother to send someone to meet her. But going back meant admitting defeat. It meant returning to her sister's house, to the spare room that smelled of lavender and charity, to the job at Mrs. Whitmore's Academy, where the girls giggled behind their hands at the spinster teacher who'd never have a husband because she could look most men straight in the eye. Miriam straightened her spine, all 5 feet 11 inches of it, and started walking toward town. The snow made everything look the same, turned the world into a child's slate wiped almost clean. Her boots found the road more by instinct than sight, following the depression between what must have been buildings. She passed a saloon, its windows glowing faintly with lamplight. The sound of male laughter muffled behind frosted glass. Not a place for a respectable woman, especially not alone. Next came what might have been a general store, but it was shuttered tight. Closed, painted across the door in letters as final as a gravestone epitaph. The church, when she finally reached it, was dark as a tomb. The parsonage beside it showed no signs of life, no smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. Snow had drifted against the front door like a barricade. For the first time since leaving Kansas City, Miriam felt something crack inside her chest. Not quite despair, but close enough to recognize its shape. She set down her valise and knocked on the parsonage door. The sound swallowed almost immediately by the storm. "Reverend Mills." Her voice came out smaller than intended. She cleared her throat. Tried again. "Reverend Mills, it's Miss Devereaux, from Kansas City." Nothing. Only the wind answering, pulling at her bonnet, finding every place where her hair had come loose. She knocked again, harder, until her knuckles hurt through the gloves. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, then silence again. Miriam picked up her valise and turned back toward the main street. There had to be somewhere a boarding house, a hotel, anywhere with walls and a roof and maybe, if she was lucky, a fire. Her feet had gone numb in her boots, and she couldn't feel her nose anymore. The thought crossed her mind that she might die here, frozen like a statue, and they'd find her in the spring when the snow melted. The tallest corpse in Copper Hollow's cemetery. She almost laughed at that. Almost. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontal, turning the world into a white wall. She stumbled, caught herself, kept walking. Somewhere ahead, she thought she saw a light. Or maybe it was just the snow playing tricks, the way it did when you stared at it too long. But no, there it was again. A steady glow, like a lantern, like hope. She moved toward it, no longer caring if her dress dragged in the snow, no longer trying to maintain any semblance of dignity. The light grew stronger, and she could make out a figure beside it. A man, taller than her, which was rare enough to notice standing by what looked like a hitching post. He didn't move as she approached, just watched her come through the snow like he'd been waiting, like he'd known someone would need finding on a night like this. Miriam stopped a few feet away, close enough to see his face in the lantern light, but far enough to maintain propriety. Even half frozen and possibly abandoned, she was still a lady. Her mother had made sure of that, drilling manners into her bones deeper than any cold could reach. The man touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that somehow managed to be both polite and economical. He had the kind of face that had seen weather and work, lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted into the sun more than he sat in parlors. When he spoke, his voice was low, carried despite the wind without him having to raise it. "Train come in on time?" Such a simple question, such an ordinary thing to ask. But standing there in the snow, having found no welcome and no warmth, having walked through a town that seemed to have forgotten she was coming, those 4 words nearly undid her. She had to swallow twice before answering. "Yes." He nodded, like that explained everything, like women appeared out of blizzards every day in Copper Hollow, carrying their whole lives in a single valise. They stood there, snow falling between them, while Miriam waited for him to ask who she was, what she was doing here, where she thought she was going. But he didn't. He just studied her with eyes the color of strong coffee, taking in her height, her traveling dress, her city boots already ruined by snow. If he found anything amusing or pitiful in what he saw, he kept it to himself. Finally, when the silence had stretched long enough that she could hear her own heartbeat over the wind, he said, "School's been closed since last month. Reverend Mills took fever, gone to his reward 2 weeks back." The words hit her like physical blows. She felt her knees want to buckle but locked them straight. "The letter." "Would have been sent before he took sick." The man shifted his weight, lantern swinging slightly. "Nobody thought to write and tell you different. Not many here got their letters." So that was it. Come all this way for nothing. 6 days on a train for a job that didn't exist, in a town that didn't want her, to work for a man who was already in the ground. Miriam felt a laugh building in her throat, the kind of laugh that could turn into something else if you weren't careful. "I see." Her voice came out steady. Her mother would have been proud. "Then I apologize for the confusion. If you could direct me to a hotel." No hotel. Boarding house burned down last spring. He said it matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. But Mrs. Webb's got a room. Not much, just a lean-to off the kitchen. But it's warm, and she won't ask questions if you're short on money. Miriam's pride reared up. I have money. Didn't say you didn't. He turned, started walking. Come on, then, unless you'd rather freeze for the principle of it. She had a choice. Stand there and maintain her dignity while the cold finished what it had started, or follow this stranger through the snow to whatever shelter he deemed fit to offer. Put like that, it wasn't much of a choice at all. Miriam picked up her valise and followed, her ruined boots finding the tracks his made. He walked like a man who knew where he was going, even in a blizzard. She wondered if that was what it was like to belong somewhere, to be so sure of your place that even the weather couldn't make you doubt it. They passed more dark buildings, turned down a side street where the snow had drifted hip-deep against storefronts. The lantern swung in his hand, creating moving shadows that made the world seem alive and shifting. Once, she stumbled, and he stopped, waited for her to find her footing. Didn't offer his arm, which would have been improper, but didn't walk on either. Just waited. What's your name? She asked, needing something to focus on besides the cold and the growing certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. He glanced back at her. Cole Tavers, run horses north of town. I'm Miriam Rose Devereaux. She said it fully, formally, the way she'd been taught. From Kansas City. Figured the last part. Was that amusement in his voice hard to tell with the wind? Not many take the train from Denver for the scenery. They walked on. The lean-to, when they finally reached it, was exactly what he'd said, a room built off the side of a larger house, probably meant for storage originally. But light gleamed through the single window, and smoke rose from a chimney pipe. And after the cold and the dark and the terrible aloneness of the platform, it looked like a palace. Cole knocked 3 sharp raps that cut through the storm. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back severe and eyes that took in everything at once. Cole Tavers, she said. What are you doing out in this weather? Then her gaze found Miriam, traveled up the full length of her, took in the valise and the snow-covered dress and the city boots. And who might this be? Miss Devereaux, from Kansas City, come to teach school. Mrs. Webb's expression shifted, understanding crossing her face. Oh, child, you didn't know about the Reverend? It wasn't a question. Miriam nodded anyway, not trusting her voice. Well, come in out of the cold, both of you. Cole, stop dripping on my porch. Miss Devereaux, you look half frozen. When did you eat last? Miriam tried to remember. There had been something at the last station yesterday, the day before time had gotten strange on the train. All those miles blurring together. Thought so. Mrs. Webb said. And that was that. She ushered them inside, into warmth that hit like a physical force. The kitchen smelled of bread and coffee and something else stew. Maybe, or soup. Real food. Hot food. Sit, Mrs. Webb ordered, pointing at a chair by the stove. Cole, stop hovering and make yourself useful. There's wood needs bringing in. He set the lantern on the table, gave Miriam one more of those measuring looks. You planning on staying? She met his gaze directly. I haven't decided. Something shifted in his expression, approval, maybe, or recognition. Well, he said, sometimes not planning is the best way to start. Then he was gone, back out into the storm, leaving Miriam alone with Mrs. Webb and the warmth and the terrible weight of having come so far for nothing. Don't mind Cole, Mrs. Webb said, bustling around the kitchen. He's got his ways, but he's good people. Saw him standing out there with that lantern and knew someone must be coming. He gets notions sometimes. Miriam peeled off her gloves, flexed fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. He was waiting for me. Waiting for someone. This weather, anybody'd need finding. Mrs. Webb set a cup of coffee in front of her, strong and black and hot enough to burn. Drink that, get some warmth in you. Then we'll see about that room. The coffee was bitter, but Miriam had never tasted anything better. She wrapped her hands around the cup, let the heat seep into her bones. Outside, she could hear coal moving around, the thud of wood being stacked. Such ordinary sounds, such unexpected kindness. "I can pay," she said. "I have money saved." "Course you do." Mrs. Webb ladled something from a pot on the stove stew, thick with vegetables and meat. "But money won't teach those children to read. Money won't give them a chance at something better than breaking their backs in the mines or their hearts in the saloons." Miriam looked up. "But the school is closed." "Building's closed. Doesn't mean the need went away." The older woman set the bowl in front of her. "Eat. You're too thin as it is, and this cold takes it out of a body." The stew was perfect hot and filling and real in a way that made her realize how hungry she'd been. Not just for food, but for this someone fussing over her, treating her like she mattered. It had been a long time since anyone had done that without wanting something in return. Cole came back in, snow melting off his shoulders. He'd brought enough wood to last the night, stacked it neat by the stove. Professional, competent, the kind of man who did what needed doing without making a fuss about it. "The trail'll be snowed in by morning," he said to Mrs. Webb. "Nobody's going anywhere for a day or two at least." His eyes found Miriam's. "Guess that decides it, then. You're staying, at least for tonight." She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some illusion of control over her situation, but the warmth was seeping into her bones, and the stew was filling the hollow places. And there was something in the way he said it, not like he was telling her what to do, but like he was stating a simple fact. The snow would fall. The trails would close. She would stay. "Just for tonight," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she wondered if they were true. Wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd already started staying the moment she followed him through the snow, the moment she chose warmth over pride, the moment she stopped planning and started living what came next. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Mrs. Webb's kitchen, with coffee and stew and unexpected kindness, Miriam Rose Devereaux began to thaw. The morning came wrapped in silence, the kind that only follows a heavy snow. Miriam woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar weight of thick quilts and the absence of train wheels rattling beneath her. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. Copper Hollow, the empty platform, the man with the lantern. She dressed quickly in the cold room, her fingers fumbling with buttons. The lean-to was simple but clean, a narrow bed with an iron frame, a washstand with a chipped pitcher, hooks on the wall for clothes. Someone had built a small shelf into the corner, empty now but waiting. Through the single window, she could see nothing but white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. In the kitchen, Mrs. Webb was already working, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. "Coffee's hot," she said without turning around. "Help yourself. Cups are on the shelf." Miriam poured carefully, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you for last night, for the room, the meal." "No need for that." Mrs. Webb shaped the dough with quick, efficient movements. "Can't have folks freezing on my doorstep. Bad for business." "What business is that?" "Keeping body and soul together, mine and everybody else's, when I can manage it." The older woman finally turned, wiping floury hands on her apron. "You planning to head back today?" The question hung in the air. Outside, icicles caught the morning sun, throwing prisms across the snow, beautiful and cold and utterly foreign to anything Miriam had known. "The train won't run for 3 days at least. Track's sure to be blocked up near Garrison Pass. Happens every winter." Mrs. Webb returned to her bread. "Gives you time to think. Anyway, Time to think was the last thing Miriam wanted. Thinking meant acknowledging that she'd traveled 6 days for nothing, that she had no job, no purpose, no plan beyond the rapidly dwindling money in her valise. Are there truly no children who need teaching? Mrs. Webb's hands stilled for just a moment. Oh, there's children, the Garrett boys, the Olsen girls, little Emma Santos, more scattered around the valley, but without a proper school, without someone to organize it. She shrugged. People make do. Making do. Miriam knew about that. Making do with hand-me-down books and broken slates. Making do with spaces never meant for learning. Making do until making do became all you knew. She was saved from responding by a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps she recognized from the night before. Mrs. Webb didn't seem surprised. That'll be Cole. Man keeps ungodly hours. But when the door opened, it wasn't just Cole standing there. A small boy, maybe 7 years old, peered out from behind the man's long coat. Dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and his eyes, brown and worried, darted between the women. Morning, Martha. Cole touched his hat brim. This is Jamie. His ma's taken poorly, and I told her I'd watch him while I made my rounds. Wondered if you might have a biscuit or something. Cole Tavers, when have I ever not had biscuits? Mrs. Webb was already moving, pulling a stool up to the table. Come here, young man. Let's get you fed. The boy came forward slowly, clearly trying to be brave. His clothes were mended but clean, boots too big for his feet. He climbed onto the stool and sat with his hands folded, waiting. The kind of stillness that came from being told too often to be quiet. Be good. Don't make trouble. Miriam knew that stillness. Had seen it in too many children who'd learned that being noticed usually meant being found wanting. What's your last name? Jamie, she asked, keeping her voice gentle. He glanced at Cole, got a small nod. Patterson, ma'am. That's a fine name. I knew some Pattersons back in Kansas City. They raised the best horses in 3 counties. Interest flickered in the boy's eyes. We got horses. Not many, but Pa says they're good stock. I'm sure they are. She accepted the cup, Mrs. Webb handed her. Noticed how the older woman set a glass of milk and 2 biscuits in front of the boy without making a fuss about it. Do you know how to read? Jamie. He shook his head, then added quickly, Ma knows some words. She's teaching me my letters when she can. Your mother sounds very wise. She is. Pride crept into his voice. She can cipher, too. Keeps Pa's books for the ranch. Cole had been standing by the door, but now he moved into the room, pulled out a chair with deliberate casualness. Jamie here's got a quick mind. Helped me fix a bridle yesterday. Figured out the problem before I did. The boy ducked his head, pleased. Miriam saw the way he sat up straighter, the way his shoulders lost some of their protective hunch. Such a small thing, being seen and valued, such a necessary thing. Tell me, Jamie, she said, an idea forming. Do you know other children around here, boys and girls your age? Some. He took a careful bite of biscuit, chewed thoughtfully. Thomas and Peter Garrett. They live next ranch over. And there's the Olsen girls up the mountain. Emma Santos in town, but her PA don't like her playing with boys. That's quite a few children. There's more. He was warming to the subject now. The Murphy twins, but they live far out, and Samuel Standing Bear, his ma, works at the trading post. Oh, and Lucy Bennett, but she's older, maybe 12. Mrs. Webb caught Miriam's eye, raised an eyebrow, the same thought passing between them without words. Sounds like enough for a classroom, the older woman said mildly. Cole's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Would be, if there was someone to teach them. The words hung there, a challenge and an invitation wrapped in morning light. Miriam felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on her Mrs. Webb's knowing, Cole's carefully neutral, and Jamie's bright with sudden hope. I don't even have books, she heard herself say. Not a refusal, exactly. More like thinking out loud. Reverend Mills left some. Cole's voice was steady. Nobody's touched his things yet. Figured someone from the church hierarchy would come eventually. But with the snow, and I could ask around, Mrs. Webb added. People have things tucked away. Old readers, arithmetic books. Might surprise you what turns up when folks know it's needed. Jamie had stopped eating, biscuit suspended halfway to his mouth. You're a teacher, a real teacher. The naked hope in his voice nearly undid her. I am, or was, in Kansas City. Could you... He stopped, glanced at Cole again. Could you teach me to read? I want to read the books Ma has. She says there's stories in them about places far away. Miriam looked at this child with his 2 big boots and careful manners. His mother sick and his future already mapped out in the hard lines of ranch work. She thought about the platform, the closed school, the Reverend dead and buried. She thought about the train that would run again in 3 days, that could take her back to Kansas City and safety and a life of making do. Then she thought about making do and making better, and the difference between the two. Where could we hold classes? She asked. Practical, concrete, the kind of question you asked when you'd already decided but weren't quite ready to admit it. Cole leaned back in his chair. The church hall's empty most days. Bit cold, but the stove works. Could make it suitable. Would people send their children in winter, with the snow? Ranch families are used to weather. His eyes met hers, direct and honest. Question is whether they'd trust their children to a stranger. She's not a stranger. Mrs. Webb said firmly. She's the teacher. That's all they need to know. But it wasn't, and they all knew it. Miriam was unmarried, unknown, and most damning in some eyes, tall enough to look most men in the eye. She'd learned long ago that some people found that threatening, especially in a woman who also possessed education and opinions. I'd come, Jamie said suddenly. If Ma lets me, I'd come every day. Your Ma would let you, Cole said quietly. She wants better for you than she had. The boy nodded solemnly, then returned to his biscuit with a single-minded focus of the young. The adults sat in silence, each pursuing their own thoughts. Miriam found herself studying Cole Tavers in the morning light. He had a weathered quality, like leather left out in the sun, not old, but seasoned. His hands, resting on the table, showed the scars and calluses of a man who worked with horses and rope. But his eyes, when they met hers, held an intelligence that suggested there was more to him than just another ranch hand. Why did you wait at the platform last night? The question surprised her as much as him. Mrs. Webb made a small sound that might have been approval. Cole considered before answering. Heard the train whistle. Storm like that. Figured whoever was fool enough to travel in it might need help. You didn't know anyone was coming? No. Simple. Direct. No elaboration. But you waited anyway. Someone always needs finding in a storm. He stood, settled his hat on his head. Come on, Jamie. Your Ma will be wondering where we've got to. The boy scrambled down from the stool, remembered his manners. Thank you for the biscuits, Mrs. Webb, and the milk. You're welcome anytime, young man. Jamie turned to Miriam, suddenly shy again. Will you really be teaching school? She thought about all the reasons to say no. The lack of books, of proper space, of any guarantee the town would accept her, the train that would take her back to everything safe and known and small. Then she looked at this boy with his hungry eyes and careful hope, and the decision made itself. If your parents will allow it, yes, I'll be teaching school. His smile could have lit the room. He fairly danced to Cole's side, tugging on the man's coat. Did you hear she's staying? We're going to have school. Cole looked down at the boy, and for the first time, Miriam saw him truly smile. It transformed his face, revealed the younger man beneath the weather and the work. I heard. His eyes found Miriam's over the boy's head. Welcome to Copper Hollow, Miss Devereaux. Officially. This time. Then they were gone. leaving Miriam alone with Mrs. Webb and the magnitude of what she'd just committed to. The older woman poured fresh coffee, set the cup in front of her with a decisive click. "Right then, we've got work to do. First thing is to look through the Reverend's belongings, see what's salvageable. Then we'll need to spread word. Let folks know there's teaching to be had, and that church hall needs cleaning something fierce." Mrs. Webb. "Martha, if you're staying, it's Martha." Martha. The name felt foreign on her tongue, informal in a way that suggested belonging. "I don't even know if I can do this. I don't know these people, this place." Nobody knows a place until they do. Martha began clearing the table with brisk efficiency. "And as for these people, they're just people. Some good, some difficult. Most just trying to get by, same as anywhere." "It's not the same. In Kansas City, you were one of many. Here, you'll be the only one. Only teacher these children are likely to see. That's not a burden. Girl, that's a gift." Miriam thought about that as she helped with the dishes, her hands moving automatically through familiar motions. The only one. No competition, no colleagues, no one to compare herself to or be found wanting against. Just her and the children and whatever she could build from books and determination. Through the window, she could see Cole and Jamie making their way down the snow-covered street. The boy was gesturing wildly, no doubt telling his escort about all the things he would learn. Cole listened with patient attention, occasionally nodding or responding to something the child said. "He's a good man," Martha said, following her gaze. "Lost his wife 3 winters back. Fever took her and the baby both. Hasn't been the same since, but he does right by people." "I didn't mean to—" "Course you didn't. Just thought you should know. Man who waits in a storm for strangers, who brings hungry children to my kitchen, that's a man worth knowing." Miriam felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm here to teach school." "Course you are." Martha's voice was mild, but her eyes held amusement. "Nothing else to it." They worked in companionable silence after that, setting the kitchen to rights. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow to diamonds. The sound of voices drifted from the street people emerging after the storm, checking on neighbors, clearing paths. "There," Martha said finally. "That's done. Now, let's go see about those books." She handed Miriam a shawl, thick wool. Practical. "This was my daughter's. She's married now. Living in Denver. Won't mind you borrowing it." The kindness, casual and unearned, made Miriam's throat tight. "Thank you. None of that now? Can't have the teacher freezing? Bad example for the children." They stepped out into a world transformed by snow and possibility. The air was sharp enough to cut, but clean, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Miriam pulled the shawl closer, followed Martha down the street toward the church. She'd meant to stay just one night, just until the train could take her back to safety and sense, but watching the town wake around her, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet even through the snow, she wondered if maybe Cole Tavers had been right. Sometimes not planning was the best way to start. Sometimes you found your place by letting it find you. Sometimes you stayed because leaving would mean missing the look in a boy's eyes when he realized the world in books was about to open for him. The church stood before them, modest but sturdy. And somewhere inside were books waiting to be found, children waiting to be taught, a life waiting to be built from snow and hope, and the peculiar courage it took to stay when leaving would be easier. Miriam Rose Devereaux, late of Kansas City, teacher without a school, woman without a plan, stepped forward into whatever came next. The morning sun caught in the icicles above, throwing rainbows across her path. She took it as a sign and kept walking. The lean-to became her world, 4 walls that held more peace than she'd expected to find. After the first week, Miriam had developed a routine wake before dawn, dress by lamplight, help Martha with breakfast preparations. The older woman had protested at first. "You're a paying guest, not hired help." But Miriam needed the work. needed to feel useful while she waited for the town to decide what to make of her. The room itself had revealed its personality slowly. Mornings brought frost patterns on the single window, delicate as lace. Afternoons saw sunlight slanting across the plank floor, warming the rag rug someone had placed beside the bed. Evenings meant the smell of wood smoke from the stovepipe, the distant sound of Martha humming in the kitchen. "You've made it homey," Martha observed one evening, bringing in fresh linens. Miriam had done little, arranged her 3 dresses on the wall hooks, placed her mother's ivory comb on the washstand, stacked her few books on the shelf. But somehow these small acts had transformed the space from temporary shelter to something that whispered of permanence. "It's comfortable," she said carefully. Martha set down the linens, her shrewd eyes taking in the neat arrangements. "Comfortable enough to stay. I'm staying until spring, until the children have learned what they can." Martha's tone suggested she heard what Miriam wasn't saying. "Spring's a long way off." It was. January had settled over Copper Hollow like a heavy blanket, bringing the kind of cold that made wood crack and breath freeze. The train, when it finally ran again, had brought no letter calling her back to Kansas City, no magical solution to the question of her future. Just silence and snow and the growing realization that she'd have to make her own way. The school, such as it was, had begun slowly. First just Jamie Patterson, trudging through snow every morning, his face bright with determination. Then the Garrett boys Thomas, 10, and Peter, 8 rough-handed ranch children who'd never held a slate but wanted to learn. The Olsen sisters came next, delivered by their father with strict instructions about propriety and a donation of 2 precious books. Now, 3 weeks after that first morning, she had 9 students. They met in the church hall, a drafty space that smelled of old hymns and older wood. Cole had been true to his word. The stove worked, though it required constant feeding. He'd also appeared one morning with a collection of makeshift benches, saying nothing about where they'd come from. "You'll freeze in that shawl," Martha announced, pulling Miriam from her thoughts. "I've been working on something." She produced a heavy cloak, dark blue wool lined with what looked like old quilt batting. "It's not fancy, but it'll keep the wind out. Can't have the teacher catching her death." "Martha, I can't." "Course you can. Call it an investment. You die of cold. Who'll teach those children?" The practicality of it, the gruff kindness wrapped in common sense, made Miriam's eyes sting. She accepted the cloak, running her hands over the careful stitching. "Thank you." "Well, try it on then. Make sure it fits." It did, perfectly, reaching nearly to her ankles. Martha had accounted for her height, had made something that fit rather than something she'd have to make do with. Such a simple thing, such an extraordinary gift. "Now," Martha said, satisfied. "Cole's coming by after supper. Says he has something for the school." Miriam felt the familiar flutter of something she refused to name. Cole had become a regular presence, never intrusive, never presuming. But there, bringing firewood for the church stove, fixing a broken bench without being asked, standing at the back of the room sometimes when he delivered Jamie, listening to the lessons with quiet attention. He doesn't need to. Man doesn't do anything he doesn't need to. That's what makes it worth something. Supper was beans and cornbread, simple fare that tasted like comfort. Miriam had learned to appreciate these quiet meals, the easy companionship that required no performance. In Kansas City, dining had been about appearances, which fork to use, which topics to avoid. Here, it was about sustenance and sharing the day's small victories. "Emma Santos learned to write her name today," she offered, breaking bread into her bowl. Her whole face lit up when she realized she'd done it. "Her mother will be pleased. Maria's always wished she could read proper." "She could learn. I'd be happy to." "Maybe." Martha's tone was careful. "Town's still making up its mind about you. Teaching children is one thing. Teaching their mothers." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Before Miriam could respond, 3 knocks sounded at the door. Cole, prompt as always. Martha rose to let him in, and Miriam found herself straightening her collar, smoothing her hair. Foolish gestures. She was the teacher. He was a helpful citizen. Nothing more. He entered with his usual economy of movement, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. Evening. Martha, Miss Devereaux. Cole, you'll have coffee. If it's no trouble. Martha was already pouring. The ritual of hospitality as natural as breathing. Cole took the offered cup with thanks, but his eyes found Miriam's. Brought something for the school. It's in the wagon if you'd like to see. Curiosity won over propriety. Miriam reached for the new cloak, felt a small pleasure at how well it moved with her. Cole's eyes tracked the garment, and something that might have been approval crossed his face. Martha's work. How did you know? She's got away with a needle. Made curtains for the church hall last year. Still holding strong. They stepped out into the cold night. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and the snow crunched beneath their boots. Cole's wagon waited by the gate. Horse patient in the traces. Here. He lowered the tailgate, revealing his cargo. Books, dozens of them, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. But more than that, a globe. Its painted surface showing continents she'd only dreamed of. A set of maps, rolled and tied. And most surprising of all, a small wooden podium, scarred but sturdy. Where did you find all this? Here and there. He unwrapped one of the books, handed it to her. A reader, well worn but intact. The books came from the Reverend's house, mostly. His nephew finally came to sort through things, said the town could have what was useful. The globe was gathering dust in the trading post. Benjamin Standing Bear thought the school could use it more than his back room could. And the podium. He looked almost embarrassed. Made it. Figured you needed something proper to teach from. Can't have you standing behind nothing all day. She ran her hands over the smooth wood, felt the care in every joint. You made this. Nothing fancy, just pine and some leftover oak for the top. But it should hold. Nothing fancy. Yet she could see the hours in it, the attention to making something that would last. The gesture meant more than she could say. It's perfect. He ducked his head, pleased. We should get these inside before they freeze. They worked together, carrying loads into the house. Martha had cleared space in the parlor, understanding without being told that these treasures needed examining. Miriam unwrapped each book like a gift reader's. Spellers, an arithmetic text that made her heart sing. Geography books with pictures of far-off places. Even a volume of poetry, its pages foxed but readable. Oh, she breathed, opening a book of American history. The children will love this. Jamie especially, he's been asking about the Revolutionary War. Boy's got a hungry mind. Cole agreed, stacking maps carefully. Takes after his mother that way. How is Mrs. Patterson? Mending slowly. She asked me to thank you for teaching Jamie. Says he comes home full of stories about what he's learned. He's a joy to teach. They all are, really. Even the Garrett boys, though they'd rather be wrestling than writing. Cole smiled at that. Tom and Pete never met a situation they couldn't turn into a contest. Their pa's the same way. They continued sorting, a comfortable rhythm developing. Martha brought fresh coffee, settled into her chair with her knitting, the click of needles providing a homey soundtrack. Miss Devereaux, Cole said suddenly, can I ask you something? She looked up from the geography text she'd been examining. Of course. Why did you really come here? A woman with your education could teach anywhere. Why answer an advertisement for a frontier town nobody's heard of? The question hung between them. Martha's needles never paused, but Miriam knew she was listening. I needed to be needed, she said finally. In Kansas City, I was just another teacher, replaceable, forgettable, here. She gestured at the books, the evidence of a future being built. Here, I matter. You would matter anywhere. The words were simple, stated like fact rather than flattery. That made them harder to deflect.
That's kind of you to say.
Not about kindness, just true. He picked up another book, checked its binding. Takes courage. What you're doing, coming to a strange place, staying when everything went sideways. Most would have taken that train back.
I almost did.
But you didn't. His eyes met hers across the lamplight. That's what counts. Martha's needles clicked. The stove popped. Outside, wind stirred the snow. Inside this circle of light, surrounded by books and possibility, Miriam felt something settle in her chest. Not quite belonging, not yet, but the promise of it. We should organize these by subject, she said, needing to return to practical matters. Reading primers here, arithmetic there. Cole nodded, understanding the deflection. They worked until the books stood in neat stacks, until the maps were sorted and the globe given pride of place on Martha's side table. I'll bring the podium to the church tomorrow, he said finally, reaching for his coat. Before the children arrive. Thank you for all of this. He paused at the door, hat in hand. Town needs a teacher. You need books. Seems like a fair trade. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. This wasn't just about filling a need. This was about building something, creating a future from salvaged books and stubborn hope. After he left, Miriam helped Martha clear the coffee cups. The older woman worked in silence for a moment before speaking. That podium took him 2 weeks to make. Saw him working on it in the barn, particular as a cat about every corner. It's well made. Martha dried a cup with focused attention. Man doesn't spend 2 weeks on something just because the town needs it. Miriam felt heat rise in her cheeks. He's been very kind to everyone. Cole Tabors is many things, but kind isn't the first word folks would use. Fair, yes, honorable, certainly. But kind, she hung the dish towel with precision. That's new. Later, alone in her lean-to room, Miriam sat on the narrow bed and looked around the space that had become home, her dresses on their hooks, her mother's comb catching moonlight, books now stacked on the floor, waiting for tomorrow's lessons. She thought about Cole's question. Why had she really come here? The answer she'd given was true but incomplete. Yes, she'd wanted to be needed, but she'd also wanted to disappear, to find a place where her height and her unmarried state and her failure to secure a husband weren't the first things people noticed. Instead, she'd found a place where those things mattered less than her ability to teach, where a man could spend 2 weeks building her a podium without it meaning anything more than help freely given, where children looked at her with joy rather than judgment. Through the window, stars continued their ancient patterns. Somewhere out there, trains ran to cities where she could lose herself in crowds, where she could be just another tall woman teaching other people's children. But here, in this lean-to attached to Martha Webb's kitchen, in a town that was slowly deciding to trust her, she was becoming something else. Not just a teacher, not just a boarder, but part of something, however tentatively. She pulled the quilts up to her chin, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. Tomorrow she would stand behind Cole's carefully crafted podium and teach 9 children about the world beyond Copper Hollow. She would use books salvaged from a dead preacher's library and maps donated by people who'd decided she was worth supporting. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train in Kansas City. But lying there in the dark, warm despite the cold pressing against the windows, surrounded by evidence of unexpected kindness, Miriam Rose Devereaux thought it might be enough. More than enough. It might be exactly where she was supposed to be. The night held its breath, so cold the stars seemed frozen in place. Miriam couldn't sleep. The lean-to, usually a comfort, felt too small for the thoughts circling her mind. She rose, wrapped Martha's quilt around her shoulders, and padded to the window. Ice crystals on the glass turned the world into a fairy tale, all sharp edges softened by frost. She'd been in Copper Hollow for nearly 2 months now, long enough for the children to stop calling her ma'am with every sentence, long enough for Martha to trust her with the good teapot, long enough to know which floorboard creaked when you stepped wrong and how to coax the stove damper just right, long enough to know she should stop thinking about Cole Tavers. A sound outside made her lean closer to the window. There, movement by the woodshed, too large for the raccoons that sometimes raided Martha's compost. She watched, breath fogging the glass, as a familiar figure bent to gather an armload of split logs. "Cole?" She glanced at the small clock on the shelf midnight. Before she could think better of it, Miriam pulled on her boots and the heavy cloak Martha had made. The cold hit like a physical blow when she eased the door open, but she pressed forward, drawn by curiosity and something else she didn't care to examine. He didn't startle when she approached, just continued stacking wood with methodical precision. "Can't sleep either." "I heard noise." It wasn't quite a lie. "What are you doing here at this hour?" "Storm coming." He gestured toward the western sky, where clouds massed like an army. Wanted to make sure Martha had enough wood split. Her joints pain her when the weather turns, though she'd never admit it. Of course, even his midnight wanderings were about helping others. Miriam pulled the cloak tighter, watching him work. The moonlight turned everything silver, the snow, the axe blade, the vapor of their breath. "You could have done this in daylight." He paused, considering. "Could have, but Martha would have tried to pay me, or feed me, or both. Woman's got pride enough for 3 people." "So you do it when she won't know?" "She'll know. Martha knows everything that happens in her domain. But this way she can pretend she doesn't, and I can pretend I'm just restless." The understanding in it, the delicate dance of pride and kindness, made her throat tight. She'd learned these steps herself, accepting help while maintaining dignity, offering aid without causing offense. "I'll help," she said. "No need." "I'm already awake, already cold." She picked up a piece of split wood, added it to the growing stack. "Might as well be useful." They worked in companionable silence. The only sounds the soft thud of wood on wood and the distant whisper of wind in the pines. Her hands, already roughened from weeks of tending the church stove, found a rhythm. Stack, turn, reach, stack again. "You're different than I expected," Cole said suddenly. "Different how?" He seemed to choose his words carefully. "When I saw you that first night, standing in the snow like you'd been conjured from the storm, I thought you'd be on the next train out. City woman, educated, used to comfort. Figured Copper Hollow would be too small, too rough. And now I watch you teaching those kids. See how Jamie lights up when he finally understands something. How patient you are with the Garrett boys, even when they're being pure mischief." He set another log in place. "You've got steel in you. Just wasn't the kind I recognized at first." Steel. She'd been called many things too tall, too plain, too educated for her own good, but never steel. "I've been thinking about what you said," she offered, "about not planning being the best way to start." "Oh." "You were right. If I'd planned, I never would have stayed. Would have seen all the reasons it was foolish, no proper school, no guarantee of wages, no certainty the town would accept me." She paused, searching for words. "But by not planning, by just taking each day as it came, you built something. We built something. The whole town. You with your woodwork and firewood, Martha with her meals and mending, the parents who trust me with their children." She turned to face him fully. "I couldn't have done it alone." They were standing closer than propriety strictly allowed. Close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the faint scar on his jaw. Close enough to notice that he was one of the few men who made her feel not too tall, but just right. Miriam. Her name on his lips was soft as snowfall. "There's something I—" A crack split the air, sharp as gunshot. They both turned toward the sound. The moment shattered. There, the old pine by the fence, a branch breaking under the weight of ice. It crashed down, narrowly missing Martha's chicken coop. "Storm starting early," Cole said. "Already moving. We should get the rest of this wood under cover." They worked quickly now. Urgency replacing contemplation. The wind picked up, driving snow before it in stinging sheets. By the time they'd moved the wood to the covered porch, Miriam could barely feel her fingers despite her gloves. "Inside," Cole ordered, guiding her toward the door. "You're shaking." She was, though not entirely from cold. The kitchen welcomed them with residual warmth from the banked stove. Cole lit a lamp with quick efficiency, then stirred the fire back to life. "Sit," he said. "I'll make tea." "You don't have to—" Miriam. Just her name. But something in the way he said it made her sink into the chair. She watched him move around Martha's kitchen with surprising familiarity, finding the tea tin, filling the kettle. "You know your way around." Helped Martha through a bad spell last winter. Learned where she keeps things. He set cups on the table, movements careful and quiet. She'd never ask for help, but sometimes help needs giving anyway. Like splitting wood at midnight. Like building a podium for a teacher who might leave come spring. Like waiting at a train platform in a blizzard just in case someone needed finding. "Why do you do it?" The question escaped before she could catch it. All of it. The helping. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. The kettle began to whisper, not quite ready to sing. Outside, the wind tested the windows, rattled the door. "Lost my wife 3 winters back," he said finally. "Mary. Fever took her and our daughter both, 2 days old." His voice was steady, but his hands stilled on the teacup. "After that, I spent months feeling like I was walking through deep water. Everything slow, everything hard." Miriam said nothing, knowing that sometimes silence was the greatest kindness. "Martha brought me soup every day for 2 weeks, even when I wouldn't answer the door, just left it on the step. The Pattersons included me in their brandings. Even when I was poor help, Reverend Mills sat with me, never preaching, just present." He poured water over the tea leaves, the mundane action a counterpoint to his words. "This town held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. Helping others, it's how I pay that back. I'm sorry about Mary and your daughter." "Thank you." He brought the cups to the table, sat across from her. "I don't talk about it much, but tonight, with you." He trailed off, shook his head. "You make me remember there's more to life than just getting through it." The words hung between them, delicate as spun glass. Miriam wrapped her hands around the hot cup, felt the warmth seep into her bones. She thought about walls built from grief, about the courage it took to step outside them. "I was engaged once," she heard herself say. "Edward Thornton, a clerk at the bank where my father worked. Perfectly suitable. Everyone said, decent prospects, good family." She took a sip of tea, tasting bitterness and comfort in equal measure. "He courted me for 6 months. Then one day, quite out of nowhere, he said he'd been thinking about our future, about how it might look. Him with a wife who could stare down at him. How people might laugh." Cole's expression darkened. "Fool. Perhaps, or perhaps just honest about what he could accept." She managed a small smile. "He married Constance Waverly 2 months later. She's quite petite. They look very proportional together. His loss. That's what my sister said, right before she suggested I lower my standards. Consider men who wouldn't mind so much." The old hurt flickered, familiar as breathing. "As if I were goods to be discounted for quick sale. Is that why you left?" "Partly, but mostly I left because I was tired of being seen as a problem to be solved. Too tall, too educated, too particular. Here, at least, I'm just the teacher. My height means I can reach the high shelves in the church hall. My education means I can teach. Those aren't flaws to be overlooked, they're just facts." Cole studied her across the table. "You're not too anything, Miriam. You're just exactly enough." The simplicity of it, the quiet certainty, undid something in her chest. She felt tears threaten and blinked them back, focusing on the grain of the wooden table, the chip in her teacup, anything but the understanding in his eyes.
It's late, she managed. Martha will wonder what's become of her kitchen.
Martha's probably been awake this whole time, listening through the walls. There was gentle humor in his voice. Not much escapes her notice. Then we should maintain some propriety. Should we? He stood, but made no move toward the door. Miriam, He stopped, started again. Spring will come. You'll have choices then. The train runs both ways. But I want you to know if you stayed. If you chose Copper Hollow not just for the winter, but for good, you wouldn't regret it. How can you be sure? Because I see how you are with the children. How you've made that drafty church hall into a real school. How you've gotten folks to trust you with their young ones. He picked up his hat, turned it in his hands. And because I've gotten used to looking for you, watching for that blue cloak coming down the street, listening for your voice calling the Garrett boys to order. Would be a harder world without those things in it. Before she could respond, before she could sort through the tangle of hope and fear and possibility his words created, he was at the door. Storm's getting worse. I should check on the horses. He paused, silhouetted against the darkness. What I said earlier, about you being steel, I was wrong. Her heart sank. You're not steel. Steel's cold, unbending. You're more like... He seemed to search for words. Like good rope, strong enough to hold whatever weight gets put on it, flexible enough to tie into something useful, the kind of thing that saves lives without making a fuss about it. Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm, leaving Miriam alone with cooling tea and warming thoughts. She sat for a long moment, hearing his words echo. Not to anything, just exactly enough. Through the window, snow fell in earnest now, the promised storm arriving with fury. But the kitchen was warm, the wood was stacked, and somewhere out in that swirling white, a man was checking on horses because that's what needed doing. She rose, washed the cups, banked the fire, normal actions that felt weighted with significance. As she made her way back to the lean-to, she passed Martha's door. It opened a crack.
Everything all right, dear?
Miriam couldn't suppress a smile.
Yes, Martha, everything's fine.
Good. Cold night to be wandering. Person could catch their death. The door closed with a definitive click. Back in her room, Miriam sat on the bed and looked at her hands. Teacher's hands now, marked with chalk dust and ink stains. Strong hands, capable hands. Hands that could stack wood at midnight and hold a grieving man's story with care. She thought about spring, about choices, about trains that ran both directions. But mostly, she thought about a man who saw her not as a problem to be solved, but as a person worth knowing, who built things meant to last and helped in secret, and spoke truths in kitchens after midnight. The storm raged outside, but inside her small room, something had shifted. Some wall had come down. Some decision had been made without her conscious participation. She couldn't name it yet, this feeling, but it was warm and solid and real as the quilts she pulled around her. Not planning. Cole had said that first night. Sometimes that was the best way to start. Maybe it was also the best way to continue, to let each day build on the last, to trust that what was meant to happen would happen in its own time. Miriam lay back, listening to the storm. Tomorrow there would be children to teach, lessons to plan, fires to tend. But tonight, in the space between midnight and morning, between winter and spring, between staying and going, she allowed herself to hope. Just a little, just enough. Just exactly enough. The abandoned barn behind the church had been Miriam's idea. March had come in fierce, bringing winds that rattled the church hall windows and made the children huddle close to the stove. The space they'd been using was too small, now word had spread, and her 9 students had become 15, with more asking to join each week. We need somewhere bigger, she'd told Martha over breakfast. Somewhere the children can spread out, work on different lessons without disturbing each other. Martha had mentioned the barn, empty since the church's last minister kept a milk cow. That afternoon, Miriam walked through the dusty space, seeing possibility in the solid beams and wide floor. Yes, it needed work, new chinking between the logs, glass for the empty window frames, a proper stove, but it had good bones, as her father would have said. Now, 2 weeks later, the transformation was remarkable. Parents had appeared with tools and time, understanding that their children's education was worth a few days' labor. The Garrett brothers had brought glass panes from their ranch, surplus from a building project. Mrs. Santos had sewn curtains from flour sacks, embroidering them with cheerful flowers, even gruff Mr. Olson had spent 3 days rechinking the walls, muttering in Norwegian but working steady. Miriam stood in the doorway of her new schoolhouse, watching the children file in for their first day in the space. Their voices echoed differently here, excited and slightly awed. Jamie Patterson ran his hand along a smooth bench, eyes bright.
It's like a real school now. Miss Devereaux?
It was always a real school, she corrected gently. Learning makes it real. Not the building, but yes, this is better. Isn't it? She'd arranged the space carefully. Younger children would sit near the stove, older ones by the windows where the light was best. She'd hung the maps Cole had brought, placed the globe on a special shelf. The podium he'd made stood at the front, solid and sure. Lucy Bennett, her oldest student at 12, helped distribute slates and chalk. The girl had become Miriam's unofficial assistant, quick to help the younger ones and eager to tackle advanced lessons. Her father, a widower struggling to manage his farm and 3 children, had initially resisted sending her. Girl needs to help at home. He'd said, reading won't milk cows. But Lucy had persisted, and Miriam had offered to compromise lessons in the morning, home by noon to help with chores. Now Lucy was reading anything she could find, including her late mother's receipt book and her father's almanac. Miss Devereaux. Emma Santos raised her hand, still shy despite weeks of encouragement. Can I show what I wrote?
Of course. Emma, come to the front.
The 7-year-old walked carefully to the podium, clutching her slate. She'd written a simple sentence, "My cat has spots." Each letter was painstakingly formed, evidence of hours of practice. That's wonderful. Emma, and does your cat have spots? Yes, ma'am. Black ones. Papa says she looks like she got into ink. The class laughed, and Emma beamed. Such small victories, but Miriam had learned to treasure them. Each child who conquered a letter, who decoded a word, who suddenly understood that marks on paper could carry meaning. Each was a miracle. Now then, Miriam said, moving to the board she'd improvised from painted planks. Who remembers what we learned about the continents? Hands shot up. For the next hour, she guided them through geography and reading, arithmetic and penmanship. The Garrett boys, usually restless, were engaged by a lesson about rivers that involved calculating how long it would take a log to float from Copper Hollow to the Missouri. She was writing vocabulary words on the board when the door opened. Cole entered quietly, but every head turned. He visited often enough that the children were used to him, but his presence always caused a subtle shift in the room's energy. Or perhaps that was just her imagination, the way her own pulse quickened when he appeared. "Mr. Tavers," Jamie called out. "Look, we have desks now, real ones." "I see that." Cole removed his hat, nodding to Miriam. "Don't mean to interrupt. Wanted to check if the stove was drawing proper. It's working perfectly. Thank you." He moved to examine it anyway, and she suspected he'd needed an excuse to visit more than the stove had needed checking. The children returned to their work, though she caught several glancing between her and Cole with the knowing looks children got when they sensed adult undercurrents. "Samuel," she called to distract them, "please read the next passage aloud." Samuel Standing Bear, a quiet boy with serious eyes, stood and read from their primer, His English was careful but clear, each word given proper weight. His mother, who worked at the trading post, had told Miriam how proud she was that her son could read in 2 languages now. As the morning progressed, Miriam fell into the rhythm she loved, moving between students, answering questions, offering encouragement. Cole had taken a seat in the back, ostensibly still checking the stove but really watching the lessons. She tried not to be self-conscious, but awareness of his presence hummed beneath her skin. "Miss Devereaux," Peter Garrett said, "why do we got to learn about places we ain't never going to see?" "Haven't ever going to see," she corrected automatically. "And who says you won't see them? The world is vast. Peter, you might travel farther than you imagine." "Pa says I'll take over the ranch someday. Don't need to go nowhere else." "Anywhere else? And perhaps you will run the ranch. But wouldn't you like to know about the places your cattle might be shipped? About the cities where people eat the beef you raise?" She moved to the globe, spun it gently. "Everything connects. Peter, what happens in Chicago affects Copper Hollow. What happens in New York reaches all the way to your ranch." Thomas Garrett raised his hand. "Is that why you came here? Miss Devereaux from Kansas City? Because everything connects." The question was innocent, but it struck deep. Why had she come? The simple answer for a teaching position no longer felt complete. She glanced at Cole, found him watching her with that steady gaze that seemed to see straight through to truth. "I came because I was needed," she said finally, "and because sometimes we have to travel far to find where we belong." The children accepted this with the easy wisdom of youth, but Lucy Bennett studied her with eyes too knowing for 12. "Are you staying, Miss Devereaux, for good?" The question she'd been avoiding, asked with perfect directness. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the little ones sensed the weight of the moment. "I'm here now," she said carefully. "That's what matters." But Lucy persisted. "My PA says teachers never stay. Says they come for a season or 2, then go back to easier places." "Your father may be right about some teachers." Miriam kept her voice gentle. "But I'm not some teachers. I'm your teacher. And as long as you need me, as long as there are lessons to learn and children willing to learn them, I have no plans to leave." Promise this from Emma Santos, eyes wide. Promises were dangerous things. Miriam had learned that young, watching her mother promise her father she'd wait for him to return from the war, watching him promise to come home whole and well. Both had kept their promises. Technically, he had returned, and she had waited. But the man who came back missing his left arm and most of his spirit wasn't the one who'd left, and the waiting had carved hollows in her mother that never quite filled. Still, looking at these faces turned toward her with such hope, such trust, how could she do anything else? "I promise to do my very best to stay as long as you need me." It was the most honest answer she could give. The children seemed satisfied, returning to their work with the resilience of youth. But she caught Cole's expression before he turned back to the stove, something soft and pleased and protective all at once. The rest of the morning passed smoothly. She taught the older children about the Boston Tea Party while the younger ones practiced their letters. She helped Emma with her arithmetic, guided Lucy through a difficult passage in their reader, settled a dispute between the Garrett boys about whose turn it was to clean the slate. When noon came and the children scattered to their homes and chores, the schoolhouse suddenly felt too large, too quiet. Miriam stood at her podium, organizing papers, very aware that Cole hadn't left with the others. "They love you." She looked up to find him standing closer than she'd expected. "They love learning. I'm just the facilitator." "No." His voice was firm. "They love you. The way you see them, each one. The way you make them feel capable of more than they thought possible." He paused, seemed to gather himself. "It's a gift, what you do. Teaching is not the teaching, though that too." He moved closer still, and she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. So few men required that of her. The seeing, really seeing people for who they are, not who you expect them to be. Cole. I need to say this. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. That night, during the storm, when you told me about that fool in Kansas City, I wanted to find him, wanted to show him what he'd thrown away. But then I realized I should be grateful to him. His stupidity brought you here. You don't have to. I do. He took a breath. Miriam, I'm not a man of pretty words. I work with my hands. I know horses better than people most days. But I know what I feel, and what I feel when I look at you. He shook his head. Spring's coming. You'll have choices. I just want you to know that one of those choices is staying. Not just for the children, not just for the town. For me, with me. The words hung in the dusty air between them. Through the windows, Miriam could see the mountains, still snow-capped but beginning to soften around the edges. Spring was coming, and with it, decisions she'd pushed off through the winter months. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Not yet. Just think about it. Think about whether you could be happy here. Really happy. Not just making do. He reached out, touched her hand where it rested on the podium. The contact was brief but electric. Think about whether you could build a life with a man who's already buried one family and never thought he'd want another. Until you. Before she could respond, before she could process the magnitude of what he was offering, he was gone. The schoolhouse door closed behind him with quiet finality, leaving her alone with chalk dust and possibility. Miriam sank onto the nearest bench, mind reeling. She'd known, of course, some part of her had known since that night in Martha's kitchen, maybe even since that first night when he'd waited in the storm. Known that this was more than kindness, more than community support for the new teacher. But knowing and acknowledging were different things. Acknowledging meant admitting her own feelings, the way her day felt incomplete if he didn't stop by, the way she found herself looking for him in town, listening for his voice. She thought about Kansas City, about the life she'd left. Her sister's letters came regularly now, full of news about people she'd known, events she was missing. There would be a place for her if she returned. There always was for useful spinster sisters who could help with children and household management. But that life felt like clothes that no longer fit. She'd grown here in Copper Hollow, stretched into spaces she hadn't known existed. Going back would mean shrinking herself again, fitting into expectations and limitations that now chafed like too tight shoes. A sound made her look up. Lucy Bennett stood in the doorway, obviously having returned for something. Sorry, Miss Devereaux, I forgot my reader. The girl hurried to collect her book, then paused. He's a good man. Mr. Tavers, my ma knew his wife, said she was lucky to have him, even if their time was short. Lucy! I know it's not my business, but my PA was wrong. What he said about teachers not staying, some do. My ma's cousin up in Denver. She married a rancher and taught school for 30 years, raised 4 children of her own and taught hundreds more. Lucy clutched her book. I just thought you should know. It's possible, if you want it to be. Then she was gone too, leaving Miriam alone with even more to consider. Through the windows. Afternoon sun slanted across empty benches, illuminating motes of chalk dust that danced like possibilities. She rose, gathered her things, but found herself reluctant to leave. This space, built by community effort and filled with children's voices, felt like home in a way her rented rooms in Kansas City never had. The podium Cole had made stood solid beneath her hands, crafted to last not just seasons but years, decades, even. Outside, Copper Hollow went about its business. She could hear hammering from the blacksmith's shop, the creak of wagon wheels, children's voices calling to each other. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary town, but they pulled at her heart with surprising strength. She thought about Cole's words, not just staying for the children or the town, but for him, with him. The idea should have terrified her. She'd guarded her heart so carefully after Edward's rejection, built walls of purpose and independence. But instead of fear, she felt something else. Anticipation. perhaps, or recognition. Because he was right, he did see her, not as too tall or too educated or too anything, just as Miriam. And she saw him too, beneath the quiet exterior and the helpful habits. Saw the grief that had shaped him, the strength that had let him survive it, the courage it took to risk his heart again. Spring was coming. With it would come mud and new growth, baby animals and plowing time. The train would run more regularly, bringing supplies and news and reminders of the world beyond these mountains. She would have choices to make. But standing in her schoolhouse, surrounded by evidence of what she'd built and what had been built for her, Miriam thought maybe the choice had already been made, not in some dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones. Each time a child's face lit with understanding, each time the community trusted her a little more, each time Cole looked at her like she was exactly where she belonged. She locked the schoolhouse door carefully, proud of having something worth protecting. As she walked back toward Martha's house, she passed several of her students playing in the street. They called out greetings, and she waved, heart full. Tomorrow she would teach them about the solar system, about their tiny place in an infinite universe. But today, in this moment, their tiny place felt exactly the right size, felt like the whole world, contained in one mountain town that had decided she belonged. Spring was coming, and for the first time in her life, Miriam Rose Devereaux was eager to see what would grow. April brought wildflowers to the meadows around Copper Hollow, splashes of color after months of white and gray. Miriam had taken to walking in the evenings. After lessons were planned and papers marked, the exercise cleared her mind, and the beauty of spring in the mountains never failed to lift her spirits. Cole had taken to joining her on these walks. Not every evening he was careful about propriety, about what the town might say, but often enough that she found herself listening for his footsteps, disappointed on the nights they didn't come. Tonight, he was there, falling into step beside her as she passed the last house on the street. They walked in comfortable silence at first, following the path that led toward the creek. The air smelled of pine sap and new grass, winter's grip finally loosening. "Lucy Bennett's reading at a 10th grade level now," Miriam said eventually. "I've run out of challenging material for her." "That's a good problem to have." "I've written to my friend Sarah in Kansas City. She teaches at the academy there, has access to their library. She's promised to send what she can." Cole picked up a stick, used it to push aside some brush on the path, always looking out for others, even in small ways. "That's generous of her. She's curious about my life here, keeps asking when I'm coming back." Miriam kept her voice carefully neutral, but she felt him tense beside her. "What do you tell her?" "That I have 19 students now and more asking to join, that we're planning a recitation for the end of term, and the parents are actually excited about it. That Mrs. Patterson is well enough to help with teaching the youngest ones basic letters while I work with the older students." "That's not really answering her question." "No," Miriam admitted, "it's not." They'd reached the creek, running high with snowmelt. Cole found a fallen log, tested its stability, then gestured for her to sit. The water rushed past, carrying winter away with it. "I need to tell you something," he said, settling beside her. Not too close, he was always mindful of her reputation, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "About Mary, about why it's taken me so long to speak plainly." Miriam waited, understanding that some stories needed their own time. "We were childhood sweethearts," he began. "Grew up on neighboring ranches. Always knew we'd marry. It was easy, comfortable, like following a path someone else had already cleared." He picked up a small stone, turned it in his fingers. "I loved her. Want to be clear about that. She was a good woman, kind and steady. But I'm not sure I ever really saw her. Not the way I should have. She was just there, part of the landscape of my life, like the mountains or the seasons." He threw the stone into the creek. "When she got sick, at the end, she said something. Said she hoped the next woman I loved. I'd love with my eyes open. Didn't understand what she meant then. Miriam's throat felt tight. And now I watch you with those children. See how you bring out the best in them. Watch you navigate town politics with grace. Win over folks who are set against outsiders. See how you've made that schoolhouse into something special? Not just a place to learn letters, but a place to grow into possibility. He turned to face her. I see you, Miriam. Maybe for the first time in my life, I really see someone. The creek sang its ancient song. Somewhere in the pine trees, birds settled for the night. The ordinary world continued its ordinary business, unaware that Miriam's heart was racing like a wild thing. I see you too, she said softly. See how you care for this town without needing credit. How patient you are with Jamie when he follows you around asking endless questions about horses. How you've grieved without letting it make you bitter. She took a breath. I see a man who builds things to last and gives help like it costs nothing and waits in storms for strangers. He shifted closer, still careful but less cautious. That first night, when I saw you standing there in the snow, tall and proud and refusing to be defeated by circumstances, something in me woke up. Something I thought had died with Mary. Cole, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I know you've been hurt before. Know you've got reasons to be careful. Just wanted you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a woman too tall or too educated or too anything. I see the woman who brought learning back to Copper Hollow. I see the woman who makes me want to be better than I am. He reached out, covered her hand with his. I see my future, if you'll have me. Miriam turned her hand palm up, laced her fingers through his. Such a simple gesture, but it felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. I've spent so long being practical, making sensible choices, guarding my heart, planning for disappointment. She squeezed his hand. I'm tired of being sensible. Is that a yes? She laughed, surprising them both. That's a, let's see where this path leads. That's a, I'm choosing to stay, choosing to try, choosing to believe that maybe I've found where I belong. I can work with that. His smile transformed his face. Years falling away. I'm a patient man. I've noticed. She stood, tugging him up with her. We should head back before full dark. Martha will have opinions if I'm out too late. Martha already has opinions. Told me last week I was a fool if I let you get back on that train come summer. She told me the same thing. Well, not about the train. About being a fool if I got on it. They walked back slowly, hands linked, relearning each other in this new context. Not teacher and helpful townsman, not two people dancing around possibility, but two adults choosing to step towards something together. As they neared town, convention required them to separate, but before they did, Cole pulled her gently to a stop. There's a dance next month, spring celebration at the town hall. Would you go with me? Officially. You mean let the whole town see us together? Give them something to talk about? They're already talking. Might as well give them something worth discussing. Miriam thought about it, the scrutiny, the whispers, the weight of public declaration in a small town. Then she thought about dancing with Cole, about his hand at her waist and her hand in his, about music and laughter and spring air through open windows. Yes, she said simply. I'll go with you. His kiss on her cheek was swift and sweet. There and gone before propriety could object. Then he was walking away, whistling something that might have been a hymn or might have been a dance tune, leaving her standing in the gathering dusk with her fingers pressed to the spot his lips had touched. Well, came a voice from the nearest porch. Mrs. Garrett, of course, who missed nothing and shared everything. About time, I'd say. Miriam straightened her spine, met the older woman's knowing gaze. Good evening, Mrs. Garrett. Evening, Miss Devereaux. Or should I start practicing calling you something else? Miss Devereaux is fine for now. Miriam kept her voice pleasant but firm.
though I appreciate your interest in my welfare."
But there was approval in the sound. "Cole Tavers is a good man. Deserves happiness after what he's been through."
"Yes," Miriam agreed. "He does." "So do you, girl, so do you." Then Mrs. Garrett was gone, back into her house, no doubt to share this news with her husband. By tomorrow, the whole town would know. By next week, there would be expectations and assumptions and all the gentle pressure of a community that had decided what should happen. But as Miriam continued toward Martha's house, she found she didn't mind as much as she'd expected. Let them talk. Let them plan and predict and gossip over their fences. She had lessons to prepare, children to teach, a future to build one careful day at a time. Martha was in the kitchen when she arrived, clearly waiting. "Well, we're going to the spring dance together." "Finally. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you both in the root cellar until you sorted things out." Martha poured tea, pushed a cup across the table. "Sit. Tell me everything." So Miriam sat and told what she was willing to share, feeling like a girl again, giddy with possibility. Martha listened with satisfaction, occasionally interjecting approving sounds. "He's been different since you came," the older woman said finally. "Like someone turned a light back on inside him. And you've bloomed here, found your place." "It's the children," Miriam protested. "The teaching, having purpose. It's more than that, and you know it. It's being seen for who you are, not what you're not. It's building something that matters." Martha reached across the table, patted her hand. "It's choosing to stay, not because you have to, but because you want to." Later, in her lean-to room that had become so dear, Miriam sat at the small table and wrote in her journal. She'd kept it faithfully since leaving Kansas City, recording her observations and experiences. Looking back at early entries, she hardly recognized the woman who'd written them, so focused on what she'd lost, what she'd left behind. April 15th. She wrote. The wildflowers are blooming, and my students can all read at least simple sentences. Lucy Bennett is hungry for more challenging texts. The Garrett boys have stopped fighting long enough to discover they actually enjoy history lessons. Emma Santos wrote her first complete paragraph today, about her grandmother's stories from California. She paused, pen hovering over paper. Cole has asked me to the spring dance. I said yes. It feels like standing at the edge of something vast and wonderful and terrifying. But I'm tired of being safe, tired of small dreams and careful plans. This town, these people, this man, they've shown me that life can be bigger than I imagined, that there's beauty in the unexpected, strength in community, hope in the most unlikely places. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I'm staying because I can't imagine being anywhere else. Tomorrow I'll teach the children about poetry, about how words can sing when arranged just right. But tonight, my own heart is singing, and I don't have words enough to capture the melody. She closed the journal, blew out the lamp, through the window. Stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human hopes and fears, but beneath them, in one small town in the Colorado mountains, two people had chosen to walk toward each other across the uncertain ground of love. It wasn't sensible. It wasn't safe. It certainly wasn't what Miriam Rose Devereaux, spinster teacher from Kansas City, had planned. But as she drifted toward sleep, listening to the night sounds of the place that had become home, she thought it might be exactly what she needed, what they both needed. A second chance, a new story, a future written not in the careful script of expectation, but in the wild, hopeful hand of possibility. Spring had come to Copper Hollow, and with it, the promise of things about to bloom. The knock came just after breakfast, sharp and unfamiliar. Miriam looked up from her lesson plans, catching Martha's frown as the older woman moved to answer the door. Through the kitchen doorway, she heard a man's voice, cultured, Eastern, out of place in Copper Hollow's morning rhythms. "I'm looking for Miss Miriam Devereaux. I was told she boards here."
Miriam's stomach dropped. She knew that voice, though she hadn't heard it in months. Setting down her pen with careful precision, she stood and smoothed her skirts, then walked to the door with all the dignity she could muster. Edward Thornton stood on Martha's porch, looking exactly as he always had, immaculate suit despite the frontier dust, hat at the proper angle, shoes that belonged on city streets rather than mountain paths. Behind him waited a hired carriage, the driver looking bored and uncomfortable in equal measure. Miriam. His eyes traveled up her height, and she saw the familiar flicker of discomfort. You look, well, I am well. She didn't invite him in, didn't step aside. What are you doing here? Might we speak privately? His glance toward Martha, who stood behind Miriam like a protective dragon, made his meaning clear. Anything you need to say can be said here. He sighed. The put-upon sound she remembered from their courtship whenever she'd done something unseemly, spoken too forcefully, laughed too loudly, stood too straight. Very well. I'm here on business. The Kansas Pacific is expanding, and I'm scouting potential routes through the mountains. I heard you were here and thought— He paused, seemed to gather himself. Constance is dead. The words hung in the morning air. Miriam felt Martha's hand touch her elbow briefly, grounding her. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, meaning it. Whatever her feelings about Edward, no one deserved to lose a spouse so young. Fever, last November. He cleared his throat. The thing is, Miriam, I find myself in need of a wife, a mother for our daughter. And when I heard you were here, teaching school, unmarried still. He gestured as if the conclusion were obvious. You came here to propose? Not a question. The sheer audacity of it stole her breath. I know we parted poorly, but we're both older now, more practical. You're nearly 30, unlikely to receive better offers. I can provide a comfortable home, social position. You'd have to give up teaching, of course, but I think you'd find managing a household fulfilling enough. Martha made a sound that might have been a growl. Miriam touched her arm gently, a silent message that she could handle this. And my height, she kept her voice level. Has that become less of an issue? He had the grace to flush. I'll admit it was a concern before, but circumstances change. Beggars can't be choosers, as they say. Indeed. Miriam straightened to her full height, watched him step back instinctively. So, you're begging— I'm offering you respectability, a chance to leave this— He gestured at the town around them. This backwater and return to civilization, to be a proper lady instead of whatever it is you're playing at here. Playing at— She tasted the words, found them bitter. Is that what you think I'm doing, playing? Come now, Miriam, teaching farm children their letters in a barn. Living in someone's spare room, this isn't the life you were raised for. No, she agreed. It's better. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. I beg your pardon. The life I was raised for involved making myself smaller to fit others' expectations, accepting crumbs of approval when I managed to be quiet enough, docile enough, invisible enough. She stepped onto the porch, forcing him to back up. Here, I teach 23 children, not farm children, but future citizens who deserve every opportunity education can provide. I've helped build a real school. I'm valued for my knowledge, my dedication, my ability not in spite of my height, but because it helps me command a classroom. Miriam, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You left me because you couldn't bear being seen with a woman who made you feel small. Now you want me back because your circumstances have changed, because you need someone to raise your daughter and manage your household, and you've calculated that your need outweighs your embarrassment. That's not— It is. She cut him off, surprising them both. The old Miriam would never have interrupted. Tell me, Edward, what's my favorite book? What subject do I most love to teach? What makes me laugh? What are my dreams beyond being some man's solution to a domestic problem? His silence was answer enough. You don't know because you never asked, never saw me as more than a collection of attributes to be weighed and measured and found wanting. She felt tears threaten and blinked them back fiercely. I'm sorry about Constance. I'm sorry your daughter has lost her mother, but I am not your answer. You're making a mistake. His face had gone red, the cultured veneer cracking. No one else will offer you marriage. You'll die a spinster schoolteacher in this frozen wasteland. Perhaps, the word came out steady. Sure. But I'll die known, valued, loved for exactly who I am, not tolerated despite it. Loved, he laughed, an ugly sound. By whom these peasants, their grubby children? By people who see me. The answer came from behind them. Cole stood at the gate, deceptively relaxed, but Miriam could see the tension in his shoulders. Morning, Miss Devereaux. Martha. He touched his hat brim. Don't believe I know your visitor. Mr. Edward Thornton, Miriam said formally. From Kansas City. He was just leaving. I wasn't. Yes, Cole said quietly. You were. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable with physical work, comfortable in his own skin. Next to him, Edward looked soft, insubstantial. The morning stage leaves in 20 minutes. Wouldn't want you to miss it. Edward's face darkened further. And you are? Cole Tavers. I run horses north of town. He moved to stand beside Miriam, not touching but close enough to make his position clear. Also court Miss Devereaux, which makes your business here concluded. Court, Edward looked between them, disbelief plain on his face. You're choosing this rancher over what I'm offering. I'm choosing a man who spent 2 weeks building me a teaching podium because he wanted my work to be easier, who brings firewood at midnight so an old woman won't wake up cold, who sees me teach and calls it a gift instead of an unseemly occupation. Miriam felt Cole's presence like a warm wall beside her, solid and sure. I'm choosing someone who knows my favorite book is Jane Eyre, that I love teaching geography because it shows children the world is vast, that I laugh when the Garrett boys try to convince me that ain't is a proper word. Someone who sees my dreams and helps build them instead of asking me to abandon them. Edward stared at her as if she'd started speaking in tongues. You've lost your mind. No, Martha spoke up, her voice sharp as winter wind. She's found it. Now get off my porch before I find my broom. The threat, delivered with absolute sincerity, seemed to penetrate Edward's shock. He straightened his coat, tried to reclaim some dignity. When you come to your senses, when this fantasy collapses, don't expect— I expect nothing from you, Miriam interrupted. I never really did. That was the problem. He left without another word, climbing into the hired carriage with stiff movements. They watched until it disappeared around the corner, heading for the stage station. Well, Martha said into the silence. That was satisfying. Always wondered what kind of fool would let you go. Now I know the complete kind. Despite everything, Miriam laughed. It came out shaky but real. Thank you. For what didn't even get to use my broom. But Martha squeezed her shoulder before heading inside. I'll make fresh coffee. Suspect we all need it. Alone with Cole. Miriam found herself suddenly shy. You heard all that. Most of it. Came to see if you wanted help setting up for today's lessons. Heard raised voices. He studied her face. You all right? I think so. It's just strange. 6 months ago, I would have said yes. Would have been grateful for the chance to be acceptable, even as a last resort. What changed? She looked at him, this man who'd never once made her feel to anything, who'd offered his heart with no conditions attached. Everything, this place, the children, you everything. Good. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, reverent. Man was a fool then, and he's a fool now. His loss. Cole. What you said about courting me. Did you mean it? His smile was slow, warm as summer sunshine. Been courting you since the day you organized that library in Martha's parlor and got so excited about a geography text you forgot I was there. Just been waiting for you to notice. I noticed. She covered his hand with hers. I just wasn't sure I could trust it. Wasn't sure anyone could want the whole of me instead of some smaller, tidier version. I don't want a smaller version. I want the woman who stands tall and teaches with passion and takes on town councils when they balk at buying slates. I want the woman who makes Lucy Bennett believe she can be more than a farm wife, who makes Jamie Patterson light up like Christmas morning when he finally understands fractions. He turned his hand palm up, laced their fingers together. I want you, Miriam, all of you. Height and education and opinions and strength. Even if people talk, even if they think you could do better, let them talk. They'll figure out quick enough that I'm the one who got lucky. He squeezed her hand. Besides, half the town's been planning our wedding since February. Be ashamed to disappoint them. She laughed, the last of the morning's tension dissolving. Martha's already designing my dress in her head. Probably started the day you agreed to organize the library. He grew serious. I mean it. Though, I know that couldn't have been easy. Facing him. Having him show up here in your new life. It was easier than I expected, because I realized I don't want that life anymore. Don't want to shrink myself to fit someone else's comfort. She met his eyes. I want to stay tall. Want to stay here. Want to see where this path leads. Even if it leads to a small ranch house that needs work and a man who knows more about horses than poetry. Especially then. She squeezed his hand. Though I might insist on adding some books. Already planned on building shelves? Figured we'd need them. The casual inclusion of her in his future, the easy assumption of we, made her heart skip. Cole Tavers, are you proposing? Not yet. When I do, it'll be proper, ring and everything. Just want you to know I'm thinking ahead, planning. Building something that'll last. From inside came Martha's voice. Coffee's ready and school starts in an hour. They separated reluctantly, propriety reasserting itself. But as they walked inside, Miriam felt lighter than she had in years. Edward's visit, meant to unsettle her, had instead clarified everything. She didn't want to be acceptable. She wanted to be accepted. She didn't want to be tolerated. She wanted to be treasured. She didn't want a life that required her to be less. She wanted one that encouraged her to be more. Here in Copper Hollow, with its mountains and its miners, its children hungry for learning and its people slowly embracing her, she'd found exactly that. And if Edward Thornton couldn't understand why she'd choose this over what he offered, well, that only proved she'd made the right choice all those months ago when she'd stepped off the train into the snow. Martha handed her a cup of coffee, eyes knowing. That young man of yours handled himself well. He did. Didn't throw a punch, though I could see he wanted to. Cole's not that kind of man. No, Martha agreed. He's the kind who builds things instead of tearing them down. The kind who stays. She patted Miriam's hand. You chose well, girl. Both of you did. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, warming the valley. Soon children would arrive, eager for their lessons. Life would continue its rhythm. But something had shifted. Some last doubt had been laid to rest. Miriam Rose Devereaux, teacher, valued member of the community, woman loved for exactly who she was, finished her coffee and went to prepare for the day's lessons. She had work to do, children to teach, a future to build. And for the first time in her life, she had no desire to be anywhere else. The smell hit them first, acrid smoke carried on the evening wind. Miriam was grading papers by lamplight when she heard the bell ringing, the frantic clanging that meant only one thing in Copper Hollow. Fire. She was out the door before Martha could speak, running toward the orange glow that painted the sky. Her heart knew before her eyes confirmed it, the schoolhouse. Her schoolhouse was burning. Flames licked through the roof, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. Already, townspeople were forming a bucket brigade from the creek, but Miriam could see it was too late. The old wood, dry from years of mountain air, fed the fire like kindling. "The books," she started forward, but strong hands caught her arms. "No," Cole's voice was firm in her ear. "It's too far gone." "But the globe, the maps, the children's work." She struggled against his grip, desperate. Everything they'd built, everything the town had donated, everything that made it a real school.
"Miriam, stop!"
He turned her to face him. "It's just things. They can be replaced." "Can they?" The words came out broken. "The town already gave what they could. There's no money for new books, new supplies, and the building itself will be rebuilt." Martha appeared beside them, face grim in the firelight. "If I have to nail every board myself." But Miriam saw the faces around them, the defeat in people's eyes. They'd already given so much to create the school. How could she ask for more? The fire burned through the night. By dawn, only charred timbers and ash remained of what had been her pride and joy. Miriam stood among the ruins, soot-stained and hollow-eyed, trying not to cry as she picked through the debris. Here, a melted inkwell. There, the twisted remains of Cole's podium. "Miss Devereaux." She turned to find Lucy Bennett, clutching something to her chest. Behind her stood more of her students, Jamie, the Garrett boys, Emma, Samuel, all looking as lost as she felt. "We saved what we could," Lucy said, holding out her burden. 3 books, edges singed but readable, a slate, cracked but whole, Emma's first successful paragraph, which Lucy had been helping her copy. "When we saw the smoke, we ran." Thomas Garrett added, "Got inside before it spread too far, grabbed what was closest to the door." "You went into a burning building." Horror replaced grief. "You could have been killed." "But we weren't," Peter said practically. "And look, Jamie saved your attendance book." Jamie held it out proudly, and Miriam's composure finally cracked. These children had risked themselves to save pieces of their school. She pulled them into a fierce hug, not caring about propriety or soot or the tears finally falling. "Don't cry, Miss Devereaux," Emma whispered. "We'll help build it again. Papa says he'll donate lumber from our mill. And Ma's organizing the women to hold a bake sale," Lucy added, "to raise money for books." "The trading post will donate what we can," Samuel offered quietly. "Mother says education is worth any sacrifice." Miriam looked at these children who'd become so dear to her, who faced this setback with more courage than she felt. "We'll find a way," she promised. "I don't know how, but we'll find a way." The next days passed in a blur. Without the schoolhouse, lessons had to stop. Miriam threw herself into cleanup efforts, needing the physical work to keep despair at bay. Cole worked beside her, steady and silent, loading debris into wagons. On the 3rd day, unexpected help arrived. A wagon rolled into town, bearing the logo of the Kansas Pacific Railroad. Edward Thornton climbed down, and Miriam's heart sank. Come to gloat, no doubt. Come to offer again to save her from this disaster. But he surprised her. "I heard about the fire. The company has authorized a donation to rebuild." He handed Mayor Harrison a bank draft that made the man's eyes widen. "Corporate philanthropy. Good for our image as we expand through the territory." Miriam found her voice.
"Why?"
Edward met her eyes, something like chagrin in his expression. "Because I thought about what you said, about never asking what mattered to you. This," he gestured at the ruins, "this matters to you, so it should matter to anyone who claims to care about you." It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was acknowledgement, growth, even. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, he's a better man than I am. That Cole fellow sees things I was too proud to notice." A rueful smile.
"Be happy, Miriam, you deserve it."
Then he was gone, leaving behind enough money to rebuild and more. The town erupted into activity. With the railroad's donation added to local efforts, they could build better than before. Plans were drawn for a proper schoolhouse, 2 rooms, real windows, a wood floor instead of dirt. The enthusiasm was infectious, but Miriam found herself oddly detached, watching from the margins as others organized and planned. "You're too quiet," Cole said one evening, finding her sitting on Martha's porch. "Should be inside celebrating with the others." "They don't need me for that." He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "What's wrong?" "I've been thinking about why the fire started. No one left lamps burning. The stove was cold. So how—" "You think someone said it?" She nodded miserably. "Not everyone wants me here. Not everyone approves of women teachers, of the way I run things. What if they burn the next one too? Then we'll build another, and another after that if need be." His voice was calm, certain. "Miriam, look at what happened after the fire. The whole town rallied. Even your Edward came through." "He's not my Edward." "No," Cole agreed. "He's not, but the point stands. You've made believers out of people who were skeptical, made this town see the value in what you're doing." He took her hand. One person with a match doesn't outweigh a community with hammers and nails. "But what if—" "No what-ifs." He squeezed her fingers. "Tomorrow, we start building. The Garrett boys already have a bet on who can hammer fastest. Jamie's been drawing pictures of what he thinks it should look like. Lucy's making lists of books to order with the extra funds." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "They need to see you believing it'll work. Need to see their teacher standing tall, looking forward instead of back." She leaned into his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When did you get so wise?" "Always been wise. You were just too distracted by my good looks to notice." "Despite everything," she laughed. "Cole Tavers, you are exactly what you need," he finished. "Just like you're exactly what I need, what this town needs. Even with the complications, even with people who might never accept me. Especially then." He turned to face her fully. "Miriam, there will always be people who want to tear down what others build, who see something good and feel compelled to destroy it. But look around you. Look at this town that's ready to build you a better school. Look at those children who risked themselves to save your books. Look at Martha, who's inside right now browbeating the town council into doubling your salary." "She's what?" "You didn't hear that from me." But he was grinning. "Point is, you've got more people fighting for you than against you. And the ones fighting for you, we're louder, stronger, and a whole lot more stubborn than anybody who'd sneak around setting fires in the dark." She studied his face in the fading light. This man who'd lost everything and chosen to rebuild with kindness instead of bitterness. Who saw her not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be cherished. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. His whole face softened. "About time you noticed that too." "Cole, I love you too. Miriam Rose Devereaux. Have since the day you tried to reorganize my lumber delivery because you'd figured out a more efficient storage system." He cupped her face gently. "Love your mind and your height and your fierce devotion to those children. Love that you're already planning lessons even while you're worried about buildings." "How did you—" "Because I know you, see you, remember—" He leaned close, rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to rebuild that school. You're going to teach those children. And sometime soon, when the timing's right, I'm going to ask you to marry me. Then we'll build something else together, a life, a family, a future that no amount of fire can burn down." She closed her eyes, felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. "Promise." "Promise." He sealed it with a kiss, soft and sure. From inside came the sound of voices raised in planning, in hope, in determination. Tomorrow they would start building again. The work would be hard, the setbacks real. But tonight, sitting on this porch with this man, surrounded by this community that had claimed her as their own, Miriam felt the last of her fear dissolve. Let them come with their matches and their spite. She had something stronger: people who believed in the power of education, in the possibility of better futures, in the wild hope that one woman and a room full of books could change lives. The stars came out overhead, same ones that had witnessed her arrival in a blizzard, lost and alone. Now they looked down on a woman who'd found her place, her purpose, her people. "Come on," Cole said eventually, pulling her to her feet. "Martha's threatening to assign construction duties by force if we don't volunteer. Better choose our jobs before we end up on roof detail." Miriam laughed, straightened her spine, and walked inside to join the planning. There was work to be done, a school to rebuild, children to teach. And despite the ashes still settling in the ruins, despite the challenges ahead, she couldn't wait to begin. The fire had taken their building, but not their spirit. If anything, it had revealed what she'd begun to suspect, that Copper Hollow wasn't just where she'd ended up. It was home. And home, she was learning, was worth fighting for. The new schoolhouse stood complete under June skies, its fresh pine boards golden in the afternoon light. Miriam ran her hand along the doorframe, still marveling that it was real. 2 rooms, proper desks, windows that actually opened more than she'd dared dream when she'd first arrived in that snowstorm. Inside, the church ladies were putting finishing touches on decorations for tonight's celebration. Not just a school opening, Martha had insisted, but a proper dance to mark the town's achievement. "We built it together," she'd said. "We'll celebrate it together." Miriam smoothed her dress nervously. She'd sewn it herself with Martha's help. Soft blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Nothing fancy by city standards, but the nicest thing she'd owned since leaving Kansas City. Tonight mattered, not just for the school, but for what Cole had whispered 2 weeks ago. "Wait for the dance. I want to do this proper, with everyone watching." "Miss Devereaux." Lucy Bennett appeared in the doorway, beaming. "Oh, you look beautiful. Is it true Mr. Tavers is—" She caught herself, blushed. "Sorry, Ma says I shouldn't gossip." "Your mother is wise." But Miriam smiled. The whole town had been buzzing with speculation since Cole had visited Mayor Harrison, then spent an afternoon closeted with Martha. She had her suspicions about what was coming, but tried not to let hope run too far ahead of reality. "I made something for you." Lucy held out a small wrapped package. "For everything you've done, for believing I could be more than—" She gestured vaguely. "More than what was expected." Miriam unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a bookmark, embroidered with delicate flowers and the words, "She believed she could, so she did." "Lucy, it's perfect." She hugged the girl, this bright spirit who'd flourished under encouragement. "You know you're going to be my assistant teacher when school starts again." "Really?" Lucy's eyes went wide. "But I'm only 13. And already reading better than most adults. The younger children adore you. You have a gift for explaining things simply." Miriam touched the bookmark to her heart. "If you're willing, I'd be honored to have your help." Lucy nodded eagerly, then hurried off to spread this news. Miriam tucked the bookmark into her pocket, a talisman for whatever the evening would bring. As dusk fell, the schoolhouse transformed. Lanterns cast warm light through the windows. The main room had been cleared for dancing. Desks pushed against the walls. Mr. Peterson tuned his fiddle while his wife arranged her accordion. The smell of fresh bread and summer flowers filled the air. People arrived in their best clothes, faces bright with accomplishment. The Garrett family. Boys scrubbed and hair slicked down. The Santos family. Emma clutching a bouquet she'd picked for her teacher. Samuel standing bare with both parents. His mother offering a beautiful beaded hair comb for the teacher who sees all children equal. But no Cole. Miriam tried not to watch the door, tried to focus on greeting neighbors, accepting congratulations. The music started, couples taking the floor. She was claimed for a dance by Mayor Harrison. Then Mr. Olson. Then young Jamie Patterson, standing on her feet to reach proper height. "Where's Mr. Cole?" Jamie asked innocently.
He said he wouldn't miss tonight.
"I'm sure he'll be here." But worry gnawed at her. Had something happened with the horses? Had he changed his mind about whatever he'd planned? Then, as Peter Garrett spun her through a reel, she saw him. Cole stood in the doorway, clean-shaven and wearing his best shirt, looking nervous as she'd ever seen him. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything else faded. He made his way to her as the song ended, other dancers seeming to melt away.
"Sorry I'm late. Had to ride to Jefferson City for something. Is everything all right?"
"Everything's perfect." He held out his hand. "Dance with me." The fiddler, catching some signal, shifted to a slower melody. Cole drew her into his arms, and for a moment they just swayed, finding their rhythm. She was aware of eyes on them, of whispers and smiles. But mostly she was aware of him, the calluses on his palm, the steady beat of his heart, the way he looked at her like she hung the stars. "Miriam," he said softly, "do you remember what I told you that first night about not planning? That sometimes it's the best way to start. I've been thinking, maybe I was wrong." He guided her through a turn, using the movement to pull something from his pocket. "Maybe some things are worth planning, worth doing intentional and careful, so they last." He stepped back, and suddenly, he was kneeling. The music stopped. The entire room held its breath. "Miriam Rose Devereaux." His voice carried clear and strong. "6 months ago, you stepped off a train into a blizzard, tall and proud and ready to take on the world. You've taught our children, stood up to our doubts, rebuilt after loss, and shown us all what dedication looks like." He opened the small box, revealing a simple gold ring with a tiny sapphire. "You've also taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your life easy. It's about finding someone who makes you want to build a bigger life, one with room for dreams and books and children who need believing in." Miriam's hands trembled. Around them. She was dimly aware of Martha dabbing her eyes, of her students watching wide-eyed, of the entire town leaning in. "I'm not a man of fancy words," Cole continued, "but I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my days. Want to build shelves for all the books you'll collect. Want to raise children who'll be lucky enough to call you mother and teacher both." He took a breath. "Miriam, will you marry me? Will you stay in Copper Hollow not just for the school or the town, but for me? For us. For the future we could build together." She looked down at this man who saw her truly, who'd waited in a storm and built her furniture and stood steady through fire and rebuilding, who offered not just love, but partnership, not just acceptance, but celebration of everything she was.
"Yes,"
she said, voice ringing clear.
"Yes, Cole Tavers, I'll marry you."
The room erupted in cheers as he slipped the ring onto her finger, stood and kissed her soundly. The fiddler struck up a jubilant tune, and suddenly everyone was dancing, celebrating, shouting congratulations. "About time, Mrs." Garrett called out. "I've had fabric set aside for a wedding dress since March." "September wedding," Martha announced with authority. "Give us time to do it proper." Through the joy and noise, Cole kept Miriam anchored in his arms. "You sure?" he murmured. "It won't always be easy. Ranch life is hard. Town will always have opinions. And I'm just a horseman who reads slow and knows more about breeding stock than poetry." "You're the man who sees me," she replied, "who builds lasting things and helps in secret and loves with his whole heart. You're my choice, Cole, my plan, my future. Even though you could have had that railroad fellow with his fancy suits." She laughed. "Especially then." The dancing went on for hours. Every family wanted to congratulate them personally. The children presented a book they'd all signed for Mrs. Tavers' library, which made her cry. Even cranky Mr. Muller, who'd objected most loudly to a female teacher, gruffly offered his blessing. But the best moment came near midnight, when the crowd had thinned and the lanterns burned low. Miriam stood with Cole on the schoolhouse porch, looking out at the town that had become home. "I have something else for you," he said, producing a folded paper. "Wedding gift, though we're not wed yet." She opened it carefully, then gasped. A deed to 5 acres adjoining his ranch property. "For the school," he explained. "Your school. Thought you might want to expand someday. Add more rooms, maybe board students from farther out. Whatever you dream, there's space for it."
Cole, this is too much.
"Nothing's too much for the woman who's giving me her whole life." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her head. "Besides, purely selfish. This way I know you'll never have reason to leave. You'll have roots here as deep as mine." She leaned back into his warmth, looking at the deed that represented so much more than land. It was faith in her dreams, investment in their future, proof that he understood what teaching meant to her. "I love you," she said. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Few times. Don't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Cole Tavers. Love your steady heart and clever hands. Love how you see solutions where others see problems. Love that you're already planning for students who don't exist yet." "They'll exist," he said confidently. "Town's growing, railroads bringing new families. That school will be bursting soon enough. And our own children. You mentioned them in your proposal." She felt him smile against her hair. "Many as you want, though fair warning they'll likely be tall. And stubborn. And too smart for their own good." "Perfect, then." They stood quietly, watching the last dancers make their way home. The schoolhouse windows reflected the starlight, empty now but full of promise. Come Monday, students would fill those rooms again. She'd teach them about the world while Cole taught them about horses and hard work. They'd grow up knowing they were valued, seen, believed in. "We should go," Cole said eventually. "Martha's probably waiting up to hear every detail. Probably has our whole wedding planned already." "Definitely. Heard her cornering Mrs. Santos about cake flavors." He turned her to face him. "You ready for that small-town wedding? Everyone watching, no escaping after—" Miriam thought about the girl who'd stepped off that train, scared and alone, convinced she'd never find a place where she fit. That girl could never have imagined this standing in the arms of a good man, surrounded by a community that had claimed her, building a future bounded only by the scope of her dreams. "I'm ready," she said, "for all of it." They walked back through quiet streets, hand in hand, no longer worried about propriety. They were engaged now, their future mapped out in promises and plans. Behind them, the schoolhouse stood solid against the night sky. It had burned once and been built better. Just like her heart, Miriam thought. Broken once in Kansas City, built better here in Copper Hollow. Tomorrow there would be lessons to plan, a wedding to organize, a life to begin constructing. But tonight, walking beside the man who'd waited in a blizzard just in case someone needed finding. Miriam Rose Devereaux, soon to be Tavers, felt perfectly, completely, extraordinarily found. The stars wheeled overhead, constant as always. But below them, everything had changed. A teacher had found her school. A town had found its heart. A man and woman had found each other. And in a new schoolhouse that smelled of pine boards and possibility, dreams were already taking root, ready to grow tall as the mountain sky. 5 years had passed since that spring dance. 5 years that had transformed Copper Hollow as surely as they'd transformed Miriam's life. She stood on the porch of the house Cole had built their house, with its wide windows and wraparound veranda, watching the morning sun paint the valley gold. The schoolhouse was visible from here, no longer new but well-loved, with additions that stretched toward the mountains. What had started as 2 rooms now boasted 4, plus a small library that drew families from 3 towns over. Lucy Bennett, now 18 and certified as an assistant teacher, handled the youngest students with patience Miriam had helped nurture. "Mama, look!" 3-year-old Mary came running, her father's dark hair wild around her face. "I wrote my name." Miriam knelt to examine the careful letters traced in the dirt. Mary, wobbly but recognizable. "That's wonderful. Sweetheart, you're getting so good at your letters." "Just like Jamie when he was small," she added, thinking of the Patterson boy who now attended college in Denver, writing weekly letters about his studies. He wanted to be a teacher too. He said to give other children what Miss Devereaux misses. Tavers now had given him. "Coffee's ready," Cole called from inside. "And breakfast if certain young ladies are interested." Mary ran toward her father's voice, leaving Miriam a moment to reflect. She touched her rounded belly where their second child grew, due before the autumn leaves turned. Cole had built a nursery next to their bedroom, shelves already waiting for books, because of course their children would be surrounded by stories from the very beginning. Inside, she found her family gathered around the kitchen table Cole had crafted their first winter as a married couple. He'd inscribed something on the underside words she'd discovered by accident while cleaning. "For all the meals we'll share, all the homework we'll help with, all the life we'll live around this table." "Miss Emma brought these by," Cole said, holding up a basket of fresh eggs. "Well, Mrs. Rodriguez now. Still can't believe little Emma Santos is married with a baby of her own." "Time passes," Miriam said, accepting her coffee gratefully. Remember when she could barely write her name? Now she keeps the books for her husband's store. He caught Mary as she tried to climb onto his lap with sticky hands. Proud of that. Proud of all of them. She thought of her former students, scattered now but still connected. The Garrett boys ran their family ranch with innovations learned from the agricultural texts she'd ordered specially. Samuel Standing Bear had opened his own trading post, offering fair prices and honest scales. Even those who'd stayed close to home showed the effects of education, better able to read contracts, figure accounts, help their own children learn. A knock interrupted breakfast. Miriam found a young couple on her porch, travel-worn and hesitant. The woman held a baby. The man clutched a worn hat. "Hey, Mrs. Tavers, we heard, that is, folks in Meridian said you might have room in your school for our William, when he's old enough, and maybe—" The woman swallowed hard. "Maybe for me too. I never got to finish learning my letters. And with the baby, I thought—" "Of course," Miriam said immediately. "We have evening classes twice a week for adults. You're welcome to bring the baby, several mothers do." The relief on both faces reminded her why she'd fought to add those evening sessions. Over protests that education was wasted on grown folks set in their ways. But she'd seen too many mothers hungry for what they'd been denied. Too many fathers ashamed they couldn't read bedtime stories to their children. After the couple left with directions and encouragement, Cole pulled her close. "You can't save everyone. You know. Don't have to save everyone. Just have to offer the chance." She leaned into his strength. "Besides, you're the one who built the extra room specifically for evening classes." "Well, couldn't have my wife holding school in our kitchen. Mary needs somewhere to practice her letters without students watching." As if summoned, their daughter appeared with her slate, showing off more attempted letters. They praised her efforts. Then Cole swooped her up for morning chores. "Come help Papa with the horses. Buttercup had her foal last night." Alone for a moment, Miriam moved to her desk, another of Cole's creations where she kept her correspondence. A letter from the State Board of Education caught her eye. Official seal prominent. She'd been expecting this, hoping for it, but still her hands shook as she opened it. Asterisk. Dear Mrs. Tavers. It began. Asterisk. The board is pleased to approve your application for Copper Hollow Educational Institution to become an official territorial model school. She sank into her chair, tears pricking her eyes. A model school. Other teachers would come to observe their methods. The territory would provide funding for more books, better supplies, perhaps even another full-time teacher. Everything she'd dreamed but barely dared hope for. Good news, Cole had returned, reading her face with the skill of 5 years' marriage. She handed him the letter, watched pride bloom across his features. They said yes, we're official. Never doubted it. He pulled her to her feet, spun her carefully. My wife, running the best school in the Colorado Territory. Our school, she corrected. None of this happens without you, without the town. Maybe, but you're the one who saw what could be. Rest of us just helped build it. Later, standing before her students in the main classroom, Miriam felt the familiar joy of a new lesson beginning. 28 children faced her now, ranging from 5 to 15. Behind them sat 4 adults, including Mrs. Rodriguez's mother, finally learning to read at 60. Today, she announced, we're going to talk about how far light travels from the sun to reach us here in Copper Hollow. 8 minutes, called out Thomas Simmons, one of her brightest. You taught us last month. Very good, but today we're going deeper. We're going to calculate how far that is in miles, then figure out how long it would take to travel that distance by train, by horse, by walking. Eyes lit up around the room. This was what she loved most, taking abstract concepts and making them real, relatable to their daily lives. By the lesson's end, they'd have touched on mathematics, astronomy, and geography, all woven together like threads in a tapestry. As she taught, she noticed Cole through the window, working with Jamie Patterson's younger brother on the ranch. He'd taken on 3 apprentices this year, teaching them the horse trade while she taught them their letters. Partnership in everything. Mrs. Tavers. Lucy approached during the noon break. I've been thinking about what you said, about college. Denver Teachers College has an excellent program. But leaving Copper Hollow. Lucy glanced around the classroom she'd helped paint, the books she'd helped organize. It seems like abandoning everything. Miriam guided her outside where they could talk privately. Do you remember when I first came here, I thought I was running away from my life. But really, I was running toward it. Sometimes we have to leave to learn, so we can come back and build something better. You came back. I never left. I found my place and planted myself deep. She touched Lucy's shoulder. But you might need different soil to grow in for a while. And that's all right. Copper Hollow will be here when you're ready. It might even need what you'll learn out there. Lucy nodded slowly. Like how we needed what you learned in Kansas City. Exactly. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, Edward Thornton. Grayer now, but still precisely dressed. He'd become a regular donor to the school. His guilt transformed into genuine support. Miriam, he greeted her, then corrected himself. Mrs. Tavers, I have a proposal from the railroad board. She listened as he outlined plans for a scholarship program, funding for mountain children to attend higher education. The railroad wanted to invest in the territory's future, he said, and where better to start than with her students? Why, she asked, though she suspected the answer. Because you were right. That day I came here after the fire, proposing for all the wrong reasons. You were right about everything. The life you've built here, the impact you've made, it matters more than any society marriage could have. He smiled wryly. I remarried last year, a widow with 3 children. She's nothing like what I thought I wanted. She's exactly what I needed. Seems I learned something from your example after all. After he left, with promises of scholarship details to follow, Miriam walked through her expanded school. In one room, Lucy led the youngest children through their alphabet. In another, the older students worked on essays about what they wanted to be: doctors, teachers, railroad engineers, writers. Dreams that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago now felt within reach. She paused at the window of what they called the memory room, where photographs and mementos marked the school's history. The salvaged books from the fire, pictures of each year's students, Cole's original podium, rebuilt and polished, a framed letter from the governor, praising their educational innovations. You done for the day? Cole appeared beside her, Mary on his shoulders. Just thinking. About how I almost got back on that train? How different everything would be if I'd chosen safe instead of staying. He set Mary down to explore the classroom, then pulled Miriam close. But you didn't choose safe. You chose us. I chose to stop running, to stop making myself smaller, to believe I could be exactly who I was and find a place that would welcome all of me. Find it, you created it. This school, this community of learners, this life we've built, you made all of this possible. We made it possible, she corrected. You and me and Martha and every person who believed education mattered more than tradition. Mary returned with a book clutched in her small hands. One of the primers Miriam had written specifically for mountain children. Read to me. They settled on the bench Cole had built along the window, their daughter between them, the baby growing beneath Miriam's heart. Outside, students played in the schoolyard, their voices carrying on the mountain air. Some would leave Copper Hollow, carrying their education to distant places. Others would stay, enriching the town with their knowledge. All would remember the teacher who'd seen them truly, who'd believed they deserved more than the world expected to give them. Once upon a time, Miriam began, reading the familiar words. There was a little town high in the mountains, where children learned that the whole world was waiting to be discovered. Cole's hand found hers over their daughter's head. His wedding ring caught the light he'd had it inscribed with the words she'd spoken that first night, just exactly enough. And it was all of it. The man who'd waited in a storm, the town that had embraced her, the children who'd grown tall in knowledge and confidence, the school that had risen from ashes better than before. She'd never meant to stay that first night, had planned to leave as soon as the train could carry her back to safety. But Cole had whispered something that changed everything. Not with words, really, but with his presence, his steady faith that she belonged. He'd whispered it in midnight firewood and patient building, in seeing her truly and loving what he saw. And she'd listened, stayed, built a life worth living and a legacy worth leaving. The little girl in her arms pointed at a picture in the book, a teacher standing tall before her students. Mountains visible through the window behind her. That's you, Mama. Yes, Miriam agreed, thinking of all the pictures yet to be drawn, all the stories yet to be written. That's me, that's us, that's home. The sun slanted through the windows, painting everything golden, somewhere in the valley. A train whistle echoed, bringing new souls to the territory, perhaps even a new teacher ready to find her place. But Miriam Rose Devereaux Tavers no longer listened for departure whistles. She was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be, tall and proud and home at last. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these Wild West tales. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart in this story. If you enjoyed following Miriam and Cole's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and finding where you belong. Your support means everything and helps keep these tales of the American frontier alive.